Ever find yourself wondering?
Yeah.
It's like really wondering how long we can actually live. I mean, you see those headlines about living to 100 all the time, right? But what's the real science say about all that?
Yeah.
So that's exactly what we're diving into today. There's this super interesting research paper, actually, from Nature Aging that really unpacks this whole question.
Okay.
And trust me, it is a pretty dense paper.
Yeah.
But don't worry, we're going to break it all down.
Okay.
Cut through all the jargon, and figure out what it all means for you. Because really, that's what we're here for.
Absolutely. And it's worth pointing out this isn't just like some random blog post or anything.
Right.
We're talking leading demographers,
Okay.
aging experts, the whole shebang. So their conclusions, they definitely hold some weight.
They know what they're talking about.
Yeah, they know what they're talking about.
Okay, so let's get into it. One of the things that really jumped out at me was how much life expectancy just exploded in the 20th century. Like we're talking an average of 3 extra years per decade, right?
Right.
But here's the thing. That pace, it's slowing down.
It is slowing down. And that's where this whole concept of manufactured time comes in.
Okay.
The paper, it argues that those incredible gains in lifespan, right?
Yeah.
That we saw in the 20th century, it was largely because we were conquering early deaths, right? Think about it. Sanitation, vaccines,
yeah.
antibiotics. I mean, these were game changers.
Huge.
Right.
Yeah.
But it doesn't necessarily mean that we've cracked the code to immortality, right?
Right. It's like we've gotten really good at keeping people from dying young.
Exactly.
But that doesn't mean that we've figured out how to actually make people live forever.
You got it. And what's really interesting is, even in populations that are known for their longevity.
Yeah.
Places like Japan, Australia, Hong Kong. Even they're not seeing that, that 3 years per decade increase anymore.
So it's not just like a Western thing.
Yeah.
It's like a human thing.
It seems to be like a species-wide trend.
That's kind of wild when you think about it, right? I mean, it makes you think about all those headlines, those clickbaity headlines like, most babies born today will live to be 100.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like, is that really true?
Well, this paper, it throws some serious cold water on that idea. Yeah. Their analysis actually shows that even in a best-case scenario, we're talking like the absolute best-case scenario here.
Best possible scenario.
Only about 15% of women and 5% of men might actually hit 100.
Wow.
This century. And to actually get to that 100-plus future, we need something beyond just like treating diseases.
Right.
We need to slow down aging itself.
The aging process.
The aging process, exactly.
Okay, but before everyone listening starts panicking about their retirement plan,
right,
the paper does offer a little glimmer of hope here, right?
It does.
They talk about this new field, geroscience.
Geroscience, yeah.
Which is completely focused on understanding how aging works.
Yeah, it's like how can we understand this process
at its core?
At its core, exactly.
And then what can we change it?
Can we tweak it?
Right.
Right.
Can we hack it?
Can we hack aging? Yeah, that's the big question.
So are you saying it's not about like this magical fountain of youth that we're all searching for?
It's not about, finding that one magic pill or that fountain. It's really about understanding the fundamental mechanisms of aging.
The nuts and bolts.
And then seeing, okay, can we tweak those?
Exactly. Can we give them a little nudge in the right direction?
So it's almost like we're on the verge of this massive societal shift.
Totally.
Right?
Yeah.
And most of us are walking around like we have no idea.
Totally. It's a huge thing to wrap our heads around.
Huge.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so I wanna keep unpacking this, but before we do, I think we need to actually get back to the paper here a little bit.
Okay, yeah.
Because one of the things that they do really well is break down just how difficult it actually is to move the needle on life expectancy.
Yeah.
Even by like a tiny amount.
Yeah, it's not as simple as it sounds, is it?
It's not as simple as you'd think.
No, not at all.
So can you, give us the ELI 5 version of what they're talking about?
Okay. So imagine, right, you're trying to add just 1 year to the average life expectancy. So we're going from, let's say, 80 to 81.
Okay.
Sounds easy enough, right?
Right, 1 year, no big deal.
1 year, no big deal. Well, the paper shows that to actually make that happen, you need to see a massive reduction in mortality rates.
Okay.
And not just for, the older folks.
Really?
Yeah.
So it's not just like, oh, well, we'll prevent people from having heart attacks in their 80s and we'll get that extra year.
It's not that simple.
It's across the board.
It's across the board. They use Japan as an example, which makes sense, right?
Yeah.
They have one of the longest lived populations out there.
Right.
So for women in Japan to see just one more year
Okay.
going from 88 to 89,
Wow.
you would need a 20.3% drop
Wow.
in death rates from all causes
Oh, wow.
at all ages.
That's a huge.
It's a big ask.
Yeah, it is a big ask. What about for men?
For men, it's still a big jump. To go from 82 to 83, you're looking at a 9.5% reduction in total mortality.
Still a pretty significant.
Still significant, yeah. And to really drive this point home.
They actually modeled what would happen if, like, hypothetically, death rates for people under 50 were 0.
Wait, so no one under 50 would die?
No one under 50.
Like, that's the bucket.
That's crazy. Okay, so what happens? What did they find?
So it only added 1 year to the life expectancy of women
Oh, wow.
and 1.5 years for men.
That is wild. I mean, that really drives home the point, though, that aging itself
Yeah.
is a major factor
Yeah.
in mortality. It's not just the things that we think of.
It's not just the diseases.
We get older.
Right. It's not just, oh, you get heart disease when you get older. You get cancer.
It's the aging
There's something about aging itself.
itself. That's crazy.
It is. It is. And it even gets more interesting when you start thinking about how death is distributed.
Across the lifespan. The paper, they call this lifespan inequality.
Lifespan inequality. Break that down for me. What are we talking about here?
Okay, so think about it this way. In the past, people died at all ages.
Right.
Infancy, childhood, young adulthood.
Accidents, illnesses, all that.
Exactly. But as we've gotten better at, treating diseases,
Right.
more and more people are making it
To older age.
to older age.
Right.
Which means the ages at which people die
Yeah.
are becoming more clustered
Right.
towards those later years.
So it's like we're all kind of living to be about the same age,
relatively speaking.
relatively speaking.
Compared to,
Our ancestors.
Exactly.
Okay.
And this is just more evidence that simply treating diseases
Yes.
isn't going to get us to those like super long lifespans.
Yeah.
To really move beyond those current limits, we got to tackle
We got to tackle aging.
aging itself.
Okay, so are we just stuck then? Like, have we hit a ceiling for
Right.
how long humans can live?
Well, not necessarily. Remember, we've only been talking about increasing that manufactured time.
Right, like the public health.
Public health, the medicine.
All that good stuff.
Exactly. But what if
Yeah.
we could actually slow down
Yeah,
the aging process
at its core.
at its core? Like, what if we could get in there
What if we could get in there?
and really make a difference?
Are you talking about like reversing aging? Is that even possible?
Well, reversing aging, that might be a little further off.
Okay.
But the paper does mention this possibility of something called gerotherapeutics.
You're what now?
Gerotherapeutics. It's a mouthful, I know.
Yes.
But it's basically a fancy way of saying therapies that are designed to target those underlying processes of aging.
Okay, so this isn't about treating the diseases.
No, this is about
This is about like the root cause.
the root cause. Why do we age in the first place?
That's amazing.
Right.
So this isn't just like science fiction.
No.
There's actual research happening.
There's actual research happening in this area.
Wow. What are they finding?
Well, it's early days, right.
Right.
But the paper's authors, they seem, cautiously optimistic
Okay.
that this field could be a real game changer.
For extending lifespan.
Extending a lifespan, yeah.
Yeah. But even if we don't see any radical like breakthroughs
Mhm.
in like our lifetime,
Right.
this research is still important.
Oh, absolutely.
Like why? Give us some concrete examples.
Okay. Well, take healthcare, for instance.
Right.
If people are living longer, healthier lives, it completely changes
Changes how we think about healthcare.
how we think about healthcare. It shifts the focus from treating those diseases
Yeah.
to actually maintaining health and preventing age-related decline.
Interesting. So it's less about playing catch up with our health
Exactly.
and more about
Being proactive.
being proactive.
Yeah, yeah. Getting ahead of the
We're
curve.
getting ahead of the curve. I like that.
Oh.
Okay. What else? What else can we expect?
Well, think about the financial implications.
Oh.
Right.
Mm.
Longer lifespans, that means we need to completely rethink
Retirement.
retirement planning, Social Security, the whole 9 yards.
Right. Like the whole system kind of has to shift.
The whole system needs a needs a revamp.
If we're all going to be living, an extra 20, 30 years.
Exactly. Exactly.
Okay, so healthcare, finances, what about our relationships?
Ooh, that's a big one.
Right. Because it's one thing if, people are living to be 100.
Yeah.
But what if they're also healthy and active?
Right. And mentally sharp.
And mentally sharp. Yeah.
Right
For
there.
all those years.
It changes the game.
It does change the game. I mean, how would family dynamics even work?
Right. Imagine.
If you had, multiple generations.
Multiple generations.
All living together, longer, healthier lives.
It's really interesting to think about.
Would it bring families closer? Or would it create a whole new set of challenges?
Right, because you've got to navigate all these different, perspectives, these different generations.
Right, and everyone's got their own thing going on.
Exactly.
But they're also living longer.
They're all sticking around.
They're all sticking around, that's right. Okay, and it's not even just about family dynamics. It's how would our sense of identity even evolve?
Oh, yeah.
If we had this longer time frame to work with, right?
You could have multiple careers.
Multiple careers. You could travel the world, actually have the time.
You could reinvent yourself multiple times over.
Multiple times over. Wow. Okay, so clearly a lot to process here.
A lot to process.
And the thing is, this isn't just some abstract what if anymore, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, with all the advances in aging research, it's becoming more and more plausible that we're going to see some pretty significant increases in lifespan.
Definitely.
In our lifetime.
In our lifetime.
So the question is, how do we even start to prepare for that?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is.
And while this paper doesn't really give us any easy answers, because, science...
Right, it's complicated.
It's complicated.
Right.
It does highlight how important it is to start having these conversations now. Now.
Not 20 years from now.
Not 20 years from now. You need to be thinking about...
all of it.
The ethics, the social implications, the economics of it all.
So we're not caught completely off guard.
Exactly. We want to create a future where those extra years are a blessing.
Right, not a curse.
Not a curse.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, so it's a future full of possibilities.
Absolutely.
But it's also a future that, we need to be actively shaping.
We got to be proactive.
We can't just let it happen to us.
Exactly.
We got to make choices.
We got to make choices today.
Today.
That are going to affect tomorrow.
It'll affect us, decades down the line.
Decades down the line. Absolutely. And
that's a deep dive worthy.
That's a deep dive.
Thought if I've ever heard one.
Right.
And we are back to the deep dive. And if you're just joining us, we're in the middle of a really fascinating conversation about, aging.
Aging, the big A.
The big one. We're talking about the science of it all, the potential for actually extending human lifespans and what would even happen if we did?
It's wild stuff.
Big questions.
Big questions.
Okay, so before the break, we were talking about geroscience, right?
Right.
This whole idea of not just treating the diseases of aging.
Yeah.
But actually targeting aging itself.
Going to the root of the problem.
The root.
Why do we age in the first place? Can we even answer that?
Yeah, can we hack it? Can we change it? I mean, is that even possible? Yeah. And the paper actually gets into this.
It does, yeah. They don't just throw out these big ideas and then leave us hanging. Mm-hmm. They actually they try to walk us through what it would take to actually make those kinds of lifespans a reality.
Okay. How do they do that?
Well, they have this this really interesting graph in the paper.
Okay.
And it basically shows what the survival curve would have to look like. If we were going to achieve an average life expectancy of 110 years.
So saying if we want to live to 110 on average, here's how many people need to still be alive at different ages.
Exactly. Yeah. And let me tell you, the curve it's drastically different.
Oh, yeah.
From what we see today.
Okay, so what kind of changes are we talking about here? Give us the rundown.
Okay, so for starters, to hit that 110 average, about 70% of women would need to still be alive at 100.
70%, wow.
70, yeah. And over 24% would have to make it to 122.
122. That's older than the oldest person to have ever lived.
That's what I'm saying. That's already record-breaking territory.
Right, and we're not even done.
We're not even done.
So to get to that average.
Right. To get to the 110 average, almost 7% of people would need to still be kicking it. At 150 years old.
Okay, so those headlines about living to 150.
Yeah.
Maybe they're not as crazy as they sound.
Maybe, maybe not. But here's the thing, right?
Yeah.
They also, the authors, they're very clear about like, how monumentally difficult this would be.
Right. This isn't like, oh, just a few tweaks here and there and we're good to go.
No, no, no. We're talking about a fundamental shift
A fundamental shift.
in our understanding of aging.
Okay, so let's say, hypothetically speaking, we do figure it out,
Okay.
right? Like, we crack the code,
Yeah, we hack aging.
we hack aging, right?
Yeah.
What happens then? Like,
Yeah.
what are the implications here? Because it's not like we can just, like, tack on a few extra decades to our lives and expect everything else to just, like, stay the same.
Oh, no, 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 no. You're talking about like a ripple effect.
A ripple effect.
Right. Across like every aspect of society.
Okay, so where do we even begin to unpack that? Like, what are we talking about here?
Well, I mean, let's start with the obvious one. Healthcare.
Okay.
Right. If people are living longer, healthier lives, it completely changes how we think about healthcare.
Okay.
It's no longer about just, treating diseases. It's
Yeah.
about maintaining health
Right.
and preventing that age-related decline.
Interesting. So it's less about playing catch-up
Exactly.
with our health.
Yes.
And more about, like, proactively staying ahead of the curve.
Exactly. Being proactive, taking control.
I like that.
Yeah.
Okay, so healthcare, that's a big one.
Huge.
What else? What about, like, work and finances?
Oh my gosh, yeah. Longer lifespans. We'd have to like completely rethink retirement planning,
Right.
Social Security,
The whole system.
the whole system. I mean, people might work for longer,
Right?
maybe in different fields.
Or, like, cycle through different careers
Multiple careers.
throughout their lives. That's wild.
Right. It's mind-blowing when you really think about it.
It is. Okay, so we've got healthcare, we've got finances.
Yep.
What about, like, our relationships? How would those change?
Ooh, that's a big one. I mean, imagine if like multiple generations are living longer, healthier lives.
Right, like your grandparents are still around?
Your grandparents are still around. Your great-grandparents might even be in the picture.
Yeah.
It's a whole new world.
It really is. And it's not even just about family dynamics either, right?
Mm.
Like, how would our sense of, like, our own identity even change?
Right. If you've got like potentially decades more
Decades
to
more.
figure things out.
Right. It's not like you have this limited amount of time to, like, find yourself.
Exactly. You could have multiple careers. You could travel the world. You could reinvent yourself multiple times over.
It's almost a little overwhelming when you really think about it.
It is a lot.
It's a lot to process.
It's a lot to wrap your head around.
Yeah, and the thing is, like we were saying before, this isn't some abstract what if anymore.
Right. This is becoming more and more real.
Right. Like with all the advances in aging research and everything, it's getting more plausible
Definitely.
that we're going to see some pretty significant increases
Yeah.
in lifespan, like in our lifetime.
In our lifetime. It's incredible.
So the question is, how do we prepare for that?
Yeah.
Like, where do we even begin?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is. And I feel like, we don't have all the answers.
No one does.
No one does. But I do think that just, like, starting to think about it,
Yeah.
asking the questions,
Having those conversations.
like, that's got to be step one.
Absolutely. I mean, this paper, it doesn't really give us like a roadmap or anything.
Right. It's not like a how-to guide.
It's not a how-to guide, but it does highlight, how important it is to start thinking about this now.
Now.
Not 20 years from now.
Yeah, because 20 years from now, it might be too late.
Exactly.
Like, we need to be having these conversations about, the ethics, the social implications, like, how is this all going to play out?
How is this going to change society as we know it?
Because it will.
It has to.
Right.
Like, we want a future
We want a future
where
where
those extra years
they're a good thing,
are a good thing.
right? Not a burden.
Not a burden. Exactly.
So we're not just living longer.
Right.
We're living better.
Living better. That's the key.
That's the key. Okay, so clearly a lot to unpack
A
here.
lot to unpack.
And we're going to take a quick break
Okay.
to gather our thoughts.
Sounds good.
But don't go anywhere, because we'll be right back.
We'll be right back.
And we are back for the final part of our deep dive.
Mm-hmm.
We've been talking about aging, life expectancy, all that.
It's big stuff.
And it makes you think,
Mm.
It makes you think about the future and what's possible,
Absolutely.
what we might be able to achieve. So before we wrap things up, I would like to leave our listeners with something to ponder,
I like it.
something to spark their own deep dive.
Okay. Yeah.
So if you had to, like, distill everything we've talked about today
Yeah.
into one big takeaway, like, what would it be?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I think for me, the biggest takeaway is that even though living to 100 or even longer might seem like science fiction,
Right.
the quest to understand aging, it's already changing how we live today. Like it's pushing us to rethink what's possible,
Yeah.
and it's making us prepare for a future where longer lives they're not the exception.
Right. It's not just like this tiny group of people anymore.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's going to be like the new normal.
The new normal.
Aw.
It's a lot.
It is a lot. And it's exciting, but it's also a little daunting.
Yeah. No, absolutely. It's both. Because it's like, it brings up all these questions, right?
So many questions.
Like what happens to our relationships?
Right. What happens to
Our sense of identity, even.
Who are we if we're going to be around for, an extra 20, 30 years?
It really makes you think.
It does. And I don't know about you, but I find it all incredibly exciting and maybe a little bit daunting, too.
Oh, absolutely. But I think that's the beauty of it all, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's this big, complex issue. There's the science of it,
Right.
the social implications, the ethical question.
Just so much to unpack.
So much to unpack. But the important thing is that we're having the conversation.
Yeah, exactly.
We're starting to ask the questions.
Yeah.
Right. And that's what we're here for.
That's what the deep dive is all about.
That's what the deep dive is all about. That's right. And, this conversation, it doesn't end here, right?
Yeah, not at all.
We want to hear from you, our listeners. What do you think?
Yeah. What are your thoughts?
How do you feel about all of this?
Yeah.
About living to 100 or even longer?
Would you change anything about your life?
Right. Would you travel the world? Would you start a new career? Would you finally write that novel you've been putting off?
Let us know.
Let us know, because we want to hear from you.
Oh.
And that is it for this week's deep dive into the fascinating world of aging and longevity. We'll be back next week with a whole new topic to explore. Until then, stay curious.